A patient comes into your vaccine clinic to be immunized against hepatitis B. As you're administering the vaccine, the patient starts asking questions. How do vaccines work? Are you giving me Hep B? Why do some vaccines need to be administered as boosters every 10 years or so? Are vaccines safe? So these questions will be explored in this lecture. There's different types of immune states that exist. There's natural and artificial. You can have natural active immunity. What natural active immunity means is that you get sick and your body mounts an immune response against the pathogen. It's natural because it happens in nature, and it's active because you're actively fighting the pathogen. Natural passive is when a mother breastfeeds her baby and the baby passively gets antibodies through the breast milk of the mother. And that antibody type, if you remember, is IgA antibody. It's natural because mammals are supposed to feed their young with breast milk. And it's passive because the baby is not actually producing its own antibodies. It's passively receiving the antibodies from its mother. Now, artificial active. Artificial active is talking about getting a vaccine. It's artificial because you get vaccinated in a hospital or a healthcare setting. It was developed in a lab. And it's active because your body is actively mounting an immune response. Artificial passive is certain drug treatments using antibodies. This is one of the treatments for hepatitis. So if a patient comes in with hepatitis, you can give them the antibodies from someone else for hepatitis. It's artificial because it happens in a hospital or healthcare setting or made in a research laboratory. And it's passive because they're not actually mounting an immune response themselves. They're just passively receiving antibodies from someone else. Antitoxins are antibodies that neutralize toxins. You can kill the bacteria with antibiotics, but then you have to eliminate the circulating toxins. A lot of times, it's the toxin that's causing the most damage. So you want to cut off the source of the toxin by killing the bacteria, but then you have to deal with the toxin. Tetanus and botulism are two major pathogens where that toxin can kill people. So tetanus causes a continuous contraction. Botulism causes the paralysis, which makes you unable to breathe. So we'll talk more about those in detail once we get to infectious diseases at the end of the semester. But a lot of times, antitoxin therapy is needed to follow up the antibiotic treatment. So some principles of vaccination preparation. What we want is it should have low levels of adverse side effects or toxicity and not cause serious harm. It should protect against exposure to natural, wild forms of the pathogen. It should stimulate both antibody and B cell and T cell responses. It should have long-term lasting effects like produce memory. It should not require numerous doses or boosters, and it should be inexpensive, have a relatively long shelf life, and be easy to administer. So this is the ideal vaccine, and a lot of our vaccines kind of come close to meeting this criteria. So how do we prepare a vaccine? You can either use the whole cell, or you can use a chunk of the cell, just the antigen to stimulate the immune system. If you use the whole cellular virus, you have to change it somehow or kill it, because otherwise you would be giving them the pathogen and they'd become sick by that. So you can use live attenuated, which means you've taken away the part that makes people sick, or you can use killed cells, dead cells, or inactivated viruses. Live attenuated poses a serious risk because if it's living, it can definitely mutate back, do a back mutation to the infectious form. But it's good because it really stimulates the immune system. Killed cells doesn't really stimulate the immune system that well, but it's never going to mutate because it's dead or inactivated. Antigens are tricky. And antigenic vaccines are dangerous sometimes because they can cause these immune complexes to form, and those can settle in tissues causing local inflammation. And some types of old vaccine preps used to almost stimulate autoimmune-like disease symptoms when they were administered. We took those off the market. We no longer use those, and now we're familiar with the risk of using those types of vaccines. But still, there's some that are very effective and that don't have those side effects. So with antigenic vaccines, you usually need to use something else in the media in order to boost the immune responses. So just having the chunk of protein usually isn't enough. So we can add something and conjugate the vaccine with something else. So this is just a list of some of the vaccines that we give. You need to know what MMR stands for, and MMR stands for measles, mumps, rubella. Measles causes a rash that usually starts in the neck and then spreads to the torso and the rest of the body. But measles can cause these Koplik spots to form inside of the throat, which are deep lesions, and they can even lead to death. So measles is a pretty scary one. Mumps, that causes the gopher-like swelling of the cheeks. They infect the parotid salivary glands in the cheeks. But they can also cause swelling of the testes, ovaries, spleen, and some various other organs. With mumps, it's usually self-limiting and it goes away on its own. Very few complications unless the person is immunocompromised or the very young and the very old. Rubella causes a rash and goes away. But if you're pregnant, it can kill the baby. So MMR is an excellent vaccine. There have been a lot of talks about MMR's association with the disease autism, and all of those talks have been kind of refuted. So hopefully you'll take some time to watch the video that talks about MMR and autism. The flu, varicella, polio, rotavirus, hepatitis A, we're going to talk all about those diseases toward the end of the semester. And these vaccine preps change all the time. So often we're coming out with new vaccine preps. You definitely do not have to memorize what type of vaccination prep each type of vaccine is. This is just a general list that kind of goes through there. But definitely know what MMR stands for. Now here's some more vaccines that we give. So these are the recommended childhood vaccines, the immunization series for ages 0 through 6. DTAP versus Tdap, this is another one you need to know for the exam. So DTAP is diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. It's the initial vaccine given before 7 months of age. Tdap, same microorganisms covered, but this one is the booster that's given at 11 years of age or older. You should definitely get the Tdap vaccine if you are pregnant. During my first pregnancy, I had anyone that was going to come in contact with my baby get vaccinated. So grandparents, like my aunts and uncles, my husband, everybody had to get vaccinated, including myself. So they highly recommend that you get this booster vaccine when you're pregnant. The way to remember the difference between DTAP and Tdap is D comes first in the alphabet. So DTAP is the first one you're going to give early on in life. Tdap is the booster that's given later on in life. And then there's the shingles vaccine, the yellow fever vaccine, rabies, human papillomavirus. Most vaccines are injected. Only a few are oral. Then they had the nasal mist for a period of time, and then they took it off the market, put it back on the market. So they're kind of back and forth on the nasal one. Some vaccines require the addition of an adjuvant. So that's when I was talking about how a lot of times those just conjugate vaccines where they're just the subunits or a chunk of the microorganism, you need to add an adjuvant, and that's an extra substance to help boost the immune responses against that pathogen. Common side effects include local reactions at the injection site, fever, allergies. Some patients experience reactions to the media rather than the antigens. We'll learn about how viruses are grown later on in the semester, but we actually grow viruses inside of eggs. So if a patient has an egg allergy, they may have an allergic reaction to certain types of vaccines. Herd immunity. So this recently is a huge issue. So there's all these anti-vaxxers out there, and this is a huge anti-vaccine movement going on right now. And I'm sure you've heard all of these different things on the news and everything, and you may have your personal opinions about this and not, but this is a microbiology class, and I'm going to present some of the facts about this. And microbiologists do not believe in the anti-vaccine movement. So not to offend anyone, but this is the stance that we're going to take in this class, is vaccines are good for you and they help protect you against getting infectious diseases. Herd immunity ties into your kind of public responsibility to get vaccinated. It's not just for your own protection, it's for the protection of the people that cannot get vaccinated. So here's what herd immunity is. Herd immunity means that if a majority of the population is vaccinated, the unvaccinated are less likely to get sick. They're less likely to get that infection that a majority of the population is vaccinated against. They originally figured this out in herds of cattle. So farmers have to occasionally vaccinate their livestock, and when they do, they wanted to save some money. So they're like, well, instead of vaccinating the entire herd, let's just vaccinate like 50% of them. Because if the 50% are vaccinated, then the ones that are not vaccinated are less likely to get sick. And sure enough, that decreased the amount of disease in their herds, and they didn't have to pay so much by vaccinating every single animal. This kind of works with people as well. So we've taken this concept from farms and applied it toward general public health. If you vaccinate a majority of the population, then the unvaccinated are less likely to get sick. But we're talking about a majority of the population, and scientists have done the calculations to figure out what do we mean by a majority of the population. And for every type of infectious disease, the number is a little bit different. But let's say it's 90%. We need 90% of the public to be vaccinated to protect the unvaccinated. Now, why are people not getting vaccinated? Well, there's the anti-vaxxers, which I'm not going to go into right now. But then there's people that have underlying health conditions that cannot get vaccinated. There's children that haven't reached the age where it's safe for them to get vaccinated. There's other types of situations where you just can't get vaccinated. It's not because of funding. It's not because you just don't want to. They want to get vaccinated. There's companies that will pay for them to get vaccinated, but they medically cannot, or it will kill them. Those are the people that we need to protect. And to do your diligence in your community, you can get yourself vaccinated, and that means that you are not going to be carrying that pathogen and giving it to the people that cannot get vaccinated. You could be protecting children that cannot get vaccinated. And when these children get these infectious diseases, their death rate's a lot higher. So think about all the people that are selfishly not getting vaccinated because they're misconceptions about vaccines and about how the government is trying to control them and everything. Think about all the children that are dying because of these crazy thoughts. So as a microbiologist standpoint, and I usually don't try to get into political kind of debates here, this is what we are sticking with because this is the science class. So get vaccinated, vaccinate your children, and vaccines do not harm people. There's a small subset of people that may get sick from the vaccines, but those people usually don't die from that vaccine. If they do die after getting vaccinated, it's because of something else. It's not because of that vaccine. So get vaccinated, do your public service, and help all of the people that can medically not get vaccinated.